Okay, good morning. I think now is as good a time of any to call together this Q1 meeting of the Manufacturing Industry Consortium. Appreciate you all joining virtually today. I will thank you in advance for any patience that you have if we run into any technical difficulties for this, our first fully virtual consortium meeting. But I'm feeling good. The tech is feeling good, so let's go ahead and call to order and jump right into today's meeting. Um, I think at this point, hopefully, most of y'all know who I am. I've met with many, if not all of you. But I am Nick Rechtenwald. I'm the strategist for the Manufacturing Industry Consortium. While I have big shoes to fill from Carrie, I have a really great team supporting me. And so I'm really excited to walk us through today's meeting. I want to just quickly go through the agenda and then hop into some introductions. Um, we have a consent agenda. If you were at last meeting in October, you know that we didn't quite have a quorum last time. Hopefully, we'll have one today, and we'll be able to approve a number of consent agenda items that were held over, as well as the minutes from our October meeting. And then we'll move into a really great year three Future Ready annual report. There's a lot of rich information in there to go through, as well as our round three Workforce Ready grant updates. And then we'll take a break at 10:30. We have one update to this agenda. Unfortunately, Kyle Thomas, HEC's legislative and policy director, is out sick today, so we will not have a legislative update today, but we will have an even more sort of relevant update in the Q2 meeting, and Kyle will join us then. And then we want to move into a discussion of our occupational and wage data that's related to HB 3306. If you remember, Ronan did a nice introduction to the consortium's requirements for that bill at the October meeting. So we will share with you some of what we've put together. And really what we're hoping for is to engage you all in a discussion, a temperature check, really, as to whether you feel like the way that we're putting this publicly available data together makes sense. Is it accessible? Is it legible? And then thinking about how we can use that data, not only to meet the requirements of the bill, but to advance the objectives of the consortium. We'll sort of facilitate that discussion in two phases with a breakout room, so that y'all can, talk to each other as much as anything else, and not just listen to us talk at you. And then I want to share with you a proposal that I've discussed in the ELT, is in support of, to stand up some working groups so that we can advance the work between our quarterly meetings. I think there are a lot of objectives we want to make some real progress on in 2025. And we feel like the working group structure is the best way to really make some progress this year. And then we'll end with a forward-looking discussion about what's coming next. I'll talk a little bit about ELT transitions and our process for that. But we'll adjourn right on time at noon. So with that in mind, I'd love to take some time to do some introductions. And so I'm going to start with our executive leadership team, Jonath Colin and Mariah Robbins. Jonath and Mariah, if you don't mind hopping on camera and just saying hello to folks, and if you have anything that you want to sort of start the meeting off in terms of thoughts.
Sure, I can jump in. Thank you, Nick. I'm Mariah Robbins. I think I've met most of you in person when we've been in the rooms together. So great to see you all again this morning. Unfortunately, I'm under the weather as well. So if I'm sniffling and sneezing, at least I can be on mute and we're not sharing germs in a room. So, but great to see you all. And I'm really looking forward to this meeting today. I think there's a lot of really great updates. And I'm also looking forward to really hearing some of the changes that we're going to be talking about to make sure that this leadership team has continuity. So we're really looking forward to bringing some updates to all of you, but good to see everyone this morning.
For that, I mean, I'm super excited. First of all, Happy New Year. Apparently, I don't know where all these years have gone. Um, but Happy New Year, it's 2025. This has been going on for quite a few years. So I'm super excited to be at this junction, which means it's a place of re-energizing and catalyzing this work, which makes me very excited. Um, I, I I'm shocked that it's been 3 years. I'm also amazed at the amount of work and how much progress we've gone in the work in the first chart that we had, the first charter that we were working on. So I'm super excited. I'm super excited. And the best thing is to look around and see that there's a lot of people who are still on this journey with us. And that means a lot, to have this level of relationship that has been built for this. And so we're still in the same boat. So that's pretty awesome. Nick?
Thanks, y'all. Just a quick note, and like I said, we're kind of going to follow up with this at the end of the agenda today. You'll notice that Ed Fazer is not listed here on the executive leadership team. He's decided to step off. You may have heard he has accepted position as the new president of St. Louis University. So we're really excited for him, and he's got to focus on that transition, and definitely leave OSU in a good place as he goes on to an exciting new venture. To that end, though, we do have some new members, and in a minute, I'm going to ask everybody to hop on camera and introduce yourselves. But I want to give our new members a chance to introduce themselves. And so if we could just go to the next slide, please. So we have 3 new consortium members, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. I think 2 of the 3 are here today. Unfortunately, Justin Thibodeau from Connected Lane County couldn't make it today. If you're not familiar with Connected Lane County, it's a great community-based organization down in Lane County that does a lot of work connecting K through 12 students in Lane County to STEM, career opportunities, and provide some really interesting career-connected learning, experiential learning. And they hosted the Technology Consortium's Q4 meeting back in October as well. So they've been really strongly engaged with this work, and we're excited to welcome Justin to the Manufacturing Consortium. We're also excited to welcome Rebecca and Robert Harder to the consortium. Rebecca, if you're here, can you hop on camera and just briefly introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, Nick. Hello, everyone. As Nick mentioned, I'm Rebecca Robinson, and I'm serving as the Associate Vice President for Economic Development and Industry Relations at Oregon State. Am relatively new to both Oregon State and to the state of Oregon. Have been in higher ed for the last 16 years in other economic development types of roles, but this new unit at Oregon State is really focused on enhancing our engagement both with the private sector and with our local communities in our state to drive economic development. So happy to be here on this particular consortium. Thanks, Nick.
We're thrilled to have you. Absolutely. Dr. Harder, are you here? I don't know that I see you in the chat. Yes, I don't see Dr. Harder. Maybe he'll be joining later. We're also inviting Dr. Robert Harder from George Fox University to the consortium as well. You'll note that Dr. Harder is from, like I said, George Fox University. They're a private university that's doing some really, again, interesting career-connected work that's manufacturing related with some of their engineering programs. And we're excited to have them at the table as well. So hopefully he'll be able to join us at some point today. In the meantime, I would love everyone to have a chance to hop on camera and just introduce themselves. Since this is a virtual meeting, it's a nice way to connect a little bit more. So I think just in the interest of time, I'll kind of run through the list here. And when I call your name, I would love for you to come on camera, introduce yourself, and just say a little bit about your title and your organization. Then we can all know who's with us today. So, Abigail Lewis, if you would please introduce yourself. And make sure you're unmuting.
Yeah. Sorry about that. My name is Abby Lewis. I'm the founder and executive director of Golden Rule Reentry. We work with the formerly incarcerated down in
use the restroom. So.
Southern Oregon. We've been blessed with a grant from the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. For 3 years, we've just finished our first pilot with men who were in our manufacturing program. It was a huge success. Part of that is that they went to Road Community College to study manufacturing, and they all remained in school. So it's been a great success. We're very thankful for that.
Great, thank you. Amanda Sullivan.
Sorry, did you call me?
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry,
Just a brief name, title, organization.
Tracking committees right now, legislature, so sorry about that. Sure others can feel that pain. Amanda Sullivan Haster, I'm the Forest Policy Manager with Associated Oregon Loggers, and I help run all of our workforce development efforts for folks that work in small businesses in the forest operating community. And we are working on some really interesting stuff on industry recognized credentials and trying to do more with career connected learning, both at the high school level and potentially some career apprenticeship program stuff. So very engaged in that and always look forward to these meetings.
Great, thank you. Anna Brown.
I'm Anna Brown. I'm the Workforce Development Manager for the Port of Morrow in Eastern Oregon. And I work with our industry partners and our port industries to promote our open positions and jobs and work really closely with our high school. We run a high school internship program for about 50 students across our very small county, and in about 30 different businesses. So that's a lot of what I do.
Awesome. Glad to have you here today. Arthur, are you in the call?
Hi, Nick. Yep. Arthur Chappa with Business Oregon. We are the state's economic development agency, and I'm a regional development officer here, which is kind of a meaningless title, but I cover the Salem, McMinnville, 3-county area. So that's me.
Great. Welcome. Brandon, are you in the call?
Yeah, I'm here. Good morning, everyone. Brandon Bryant. I am the president directing business rep of District W24 of the Machinists Union. So representing labor here on the council, working to help promote good paying jobs for everyone. So thank you.
And Carly?
Hi, I'm Carly Petrovic. I'm the head of human resources for Microchip Technologies Oregon region, and we have a wafer fab here in Gresham, Oregon.
Great. And how about Claudia?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Claudia Rizzo Mendoza, and I support as a youth apprenticeship project manager through a partnership with the City of Hillsborough and the Hillsborough School District. So we currently are on our second cohort of high school students participating in the apprenticeship, and then we're about to kick off work with our round 3 Future Ready Oregon grant that was recently awarded. So I'm really excited to kick off that project and start supporting our smaller school districts as well through that grant. So it's great to be here. Thank you.
That's exciting stuff. Craig, are you on the call?
I am. Craig Campbell. I'm in a new role. I'm now the Governmental Affairs Director for the Oregon Refuse and Recycling Association. And we're the companies that pick up your garbage and your recycling and provide an end location for all of it throughout the state. And really happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. How about Eric Anderson?
Morning, everybody. I'm Eric Anderson. I'm the president of SEDCOR, the Strategic Economic Development Corporation. We're the regional economic development organization that covers Marion, Polk, and Yamhill counties.
Thanks, Eric. Kathy, I think I saw you come in.
Hi,
Kathy Bishop. I'm with Gyra Semiconductor located in Hillsborough, and also co-chair for the Advanced Manufacturing Training and Education Consortium of Hillsborough.
Welcome. Good morning, Kathy. Jared, I think I saw Jared Rivet in here.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Jared Rivet, Director of Manufacturing for Timberlab, and happy to be here.
Happy to have you. How about, let's see, looking at my notes here, who we've got. Dan Finley, I saw Dan. Maybe not. How about we'll just, in the interest of time, move. I see Tina Goldberg.
Hi, good morning. I'm Tina Goldberg. I serve as the Assistant Vice President for Economic Development and Strategic Relations at the University of Oregon. And so I work with the public and private sectors to drive economic engagement with the university.
Oh, and now I see Dan. Thank you, Tina. Well, we may be, like we said, we may, these virtual meetings are not without their hitches. So really quickly, I'm going to pause in introductions. We'll get back to it in a second, but it's 9:20. Ronan, do we have anyone registered for public comment?
Not at this time.
Great. Then we will just carry on with our warm introductions. How about Kyle? I think I saw Kyle Ritchie-Knoll.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Kyle Ritchie-Knoll, and I'm the Director of Education and Workforce Policy for the Oregon Business Council, and also very actively supporting the development of a statewide semiconductor industry consortium. Happy to be here today.
Awesome. Good morning. John Wurst.
Hi, my name is John Wurst. I'm a teacher at Forest Grove High School Mechatronics. We focus on semiconductor training for technicians and feed into that program at Portland Community College.
Awesome. And Kim? Kim, are you here? Well, Kim is here. I see her from Willamette Workforce Partnership. How about Logan Garner?
Hey everyone, my name is Logan Garner. I'm the Youth Programs Manager for Northwest Oregon Works. I'm here on behalf of Heather Dissart, our Executive Director. She's got a new grandbaby in the world. So yeah, she's super excited. We all are. But I manage our youth programs at Northwest Oregon Works that are directly serviced. And we actually have a Workforce Ready Round 3 grant, a manufacturing grant that we're about to get going in support of the manufacturing programs at all 5 community colleges in our region. So we're really excited about that.
Great. I see Travis Ryman.
Good morning, everybody. Travis Ryman, Superintendent with the Hillsborough School District. We try to align our school programs with manufacturing sector opportunities for our students. And I serve on this committee as an alternate to Claudia Risa Mendoza, and I'm happy to support and promote this work however I can.
Great. And I see Gail from Employment Department.
Hi, I am happy I am able to be here. I had a conflicting meeting, but it got canceled at the last minute. Gail Carmenauer, I'm the state employment economist in the research division of the Oregon Employment Department. All things data, employment, unemployment, long-term projections and current hiring demand for all regions and types of jobs in the state. Anyway, just data stuff in general. Happy to be here and support you all.
And we are happy to be supported by you. I think as far as my list and, cross-referencing my membership list with the Zoom participant list is never an exact science. Have I missed anyone?
This is Kim. I figured out how to unmute myself. So my apologies. On my phone, so it's a little bit awkward. Kim Parker Jadenas with Willamette Workforce Partnership. Thanks, Nick, for helping me out. We serve the Mid-Willamette Valley, the area workforce development board. Happy to be here.
Great. Thank you, Kim. Oh, and I do see Janelle Ives. Janelle, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. I'm Janelle Ives. I am the director of the secondary post-secondary transitions team at the Oregon Department of Education and manage career technical education for Oregon.
Great. And anyone else?
I think I'm unmuted now. I was actually, believe it or not, triple muted. This is Dan Findlay, Oregon Department of Education, education specialist in industrial and engineering systems. Work with Janelle and a bunch of other fantastic people, also collaborate with our folks in the post-secondary and the business sectors.
Thank you, Dan. You found out that we used the triple secret mute on you, but you got around that. Great.
It's Paul Selden here. I don't know. I was a little late. I'm the Senior Development Consultant at Golden Rule Reentry in Medford and the alternate representative for Abigail Lewis.
Happy to have you, Paul. Anyone else? That's pretty comprehensive. Well, welcome. Thank you all for taking the time to do that. I hope it's helpful for folks to sort of, see who's in the room, remind ourselves kind of where we're coming into this from all over the state and from different organizations, but also very much committed to the same objectives for the manufacturing sector. And to that point, Ronan, would you mind going to the next slide? So our objectives today, we're going to approve some revisions here when we get to the consent agenda in a second to the Manufacturing Industry Consortium. We looked at this in October. We did not have a quorum, so we could not approve it. And we did make one addition to that revision or to that charter that we'll want you to take a look at. And then we will look at the year 3 report for Future Ready Oregon, as well as the Workforce Ready grants for round 3. And then we'll have a pretty robust discussion on HB 3306, how we're planning on implementing it, packaging again that publicly available data, and sort of get your feedback on how we're doing so far with that work. We will not, unfortunately, hear an update on the 2025 legislative session. We'll save that for Q2, especially when we have a better sense of which bills we really think are going to move through the legislature. And then we will end today with a discussion about working groups and what we plan to do to move forward with our executive leadership team and how we'll appoint folks to fill the vacancies left by Ed Fazer and Scott Brune. So those are our objectives for today. And I think with that, I would like to move into the consent agenda and see if we can approve the consent agenda. Now, these materials were sent out to you all by email last week. Hopefully you've had a chance to review them, but I'm going to give everybody just a minute to look through the minutes, remind yourself what's in those minutes, take a look at the charter, and then after a moment or two to review these things, I'll ask if we can approve the consent agenda as presented.
Then Nick, to jump in, I have to step out just for a moment, but I reviewed them and I consent to them, just so you have my vote.
Carly, would you like to turn that into a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Yes, I would.
Oh, excellent. So we have a motion. Is there any discussion about the consent agenda? Thank you, Carly.
You're welcome. Okay, I'll be right back.
If there's no discussion, no questions, no concerns with this consent agenda, then what I would ask is if you would put your vote in the chat as to whether you approve this consent agenda as presented. Okay, looking through what's coming through the chat, that feels like we've reached consensus, and we're approving these items as a package. So that's great. Glad you're all so agreeable this morning. That makes our lives easier. So then, without further ado, I would love then for us to move into our next agenda item, which is our Year 3 Future Ready Oregon report. And that's going to be presented today by Jennifer Purcell, Director of Future Ready Oregon, and Amy Cox, our Director of the Director of the Office of Research and Data. So I will turn it over to them.
All right. We're testing technology today. 1 month. Okay, can you hear me now? Thumbs up. Okay, excellent. So good to be with you all. Thank you so much. We're going to start with just a little bit of a review of what Future Ready Oregon set out to accomplish, highlighting what we're learning through the investments. And then, as Nick mentioned, my colleague Amy Cox will present on the Future Ready Oregon Year 3 annual report. I'm certain that you all read that compelling piece of work from cover to cover before today's meeting, but Amy is going to give you some of the highlights. And then following Amy's presentation, you'll have the opportunity to hear a little bit more about the manufacturing sector specific investments that have been made through Workforce Ready grants. And with that, Ronan, you can take to the next slide. So as a reminder of what Future Ready Oregon set out to accomplish, it was a $200 million package of investments that work together to advance a more equitable workforce system and to increase opportunities for diverse workers by centering the needs of historically underserved and underrepresented individuals and communities, and by focusing on key sectors of our economy, healthcare, manufacturing, and technology. In 2022, the legislature made this historic investment in workforce education and training, and it included a range of programs that work together, and you can see those outlined here. The legislature and the Racial Justice Council charged Future Ready with implementing and administering these programs intended to approach workforce and talent development differently, acknowledging that a one-size-fits-all approach is not sufficiently expanding our labor force, it's not adequately meeting our workforce needs, and it's not serving the diverse needs of Oregon. To date, all of the Future Ready Oregon funding has been obligated through grant funding and strategic initiatives that aim to grow and diversify our workforce, close gaps in educational attainment and employment, and strengthen Oregon's economic competitiveness. Innovative approaches to education and training were intended to inform future workforce and talent development investments by identifying promising practices and replicable and scalable strategies. Next slide, please. And so what is Future Ready Oregon teaching us? It's teaching us that in order to increase opportunities for diverse workers, programs and policies must center the needs of historically underserved and underrepresented communities, ensuring that education and training is responsive to the needs of learners. And focusing on key sectors of our economy is providing for sector strategies that address critical workforce shortages and strategic workforce opportunities, strengthening Oregon's economic competitiveness. Partnerships are ensuring that community, education, and industry are working collaboratively towards a common goal, advancing more equitable workforce system by addressing barriers to equitable participation in both education and employment, and ensuring that education and training meets the needs of employers. Flexible funding considers systems capacity and student supports, and it's really the coupling of education and training supports with comprehensive wraparound services to meet basic needs that is ensuring that students and training participants have the resources they need to be successful. And with that framing, I'm going to turn it over to Amy to provide you an overview of the year 3 annual report results and the early impacts and outcomes of these investments.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, everybody. For the record, my name is Amy Cox. I'm the Director of the Office of Research and Data at the HEC, as Nick said. And it is our office's responsibility to put together a multi-year evaluation of the Future Ready Oregon investment, tracking its progress and its impacts, and how the different contributions it's making relate to state economic and educational goals. We work on not only the parts of Future Ready Oregon that the HEC administers, but also those programs that are administered in other agencies, including the apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship program administered by the Bureau of Labor and Industries, and the youth services program administered by Youth Development Oregon. Next slide, please. This year's report is the third of this multi-year evaluation. We'll be doing a few more in the coming years. And this year's report focuses really on, as Jennifer alluded, the participants who are served, the services that they received, and for the first time provides initial employment outcomes of those participants. We also look at how each of the 8 programs that are part of the Future Ready Oregon investment have progressed and how those compare to the educational and economic landscape of Oregon. We use many different sources of data for this report. They are listed here. I'm not going to read them, but chief among them is data on the actual participants that participants report to grantees, and grantees in turn report to the HEC. The 10 priority populations listed in the legislation are a particular focus throughout the report, of course, and I'll speak to them more as I go on, but I listed them here and want to make sure that you are all aware of those as well. Next slide, please. This slide provides some extremely high-level findings for the entire suite of investments, so across all 8 programs. What we have seen this year really is a pretty consistent set of positive findings. This shows data through June of 2024, and cumulatively, Future Ready Oregon has served more than 14,000 Oregonians, virtually all of whom are from low-income populations. Above and beyond being low income, 92% of those participants come from one of the other priority populations as well. So a very diverse set of participants, and certainly more diverse than the Oregon's labor force, which in and of itself does not say that it has achieved all of its goals of diversifying the labor force, but it is the very necessary first step that the participants themselves are coming from the priority populations. The programs themselves have offered more than 45,000 services in these first few years, averaging around 3 services per participant. Those include both workforce development services, such as they might be training, they might be resume writing, they might be a day expungement clinic. There are quite a range of different workforce development services, as well as support services. The most common among the support services is tuition and fee payments. Also, we see food, housing, and security payments, childcare services, job supplies, services, so things like uniforms or materials that are required for a job, as well as transportation. The initial employment outcomes for the participants are shown along the bottom here. I want to sort of specify who's in what group here. Some of the participants who came into Future Ready Oregon services were not employed when they began. For those participants after services, about 2/3 of them, 65%, were employed in the quarter after they ended services. That's a pretty high rate. Sometimes legislators have asked me, why is it not 100%? And I have said, well, we will continue to track them. Some participants may have moved into an education program or may still be looking for work. Just because it's not 100% yet doesn't mean that this is the end of the story. We see that high rate of employment across the different priority populations, so that is an important thing to note. There are other participants who were employed when they began services. And for those participants, really, we looked at wage gain. And what we saw is that on average, wages grew for those participants before and after the Future Ready Oregon services. So we have on here median hourly wages rose about $3 an hour. Quarterly wages rose around $700 a quarter. So we're seeing a second set of positive employment outcomes for participants who were employed at the start of services. And then the last thing I want to call out here in the findings is the very high rate, almost 1 in 2 participants who were employed after services, whether or not they were employed beforehand. Almost 1 in 2 of those participants were employed in either healthcare or manufacturing. That is a much higher rate than for the labor force as a whole. Clearly, half of the state's workforce is not employed in manufacturing and healthcare. And so those, as 2 of the key focus industries of the program, that's a third set of positive employment outcomes here. This little call out box at the right that says low reporting of Social Security numbers, that is an important caveat that we have in the background of all of these employment outcomes. The only way we can really track these with data from the employment department are with Social Security numbers. Participants range and grantees range in the rate, I should say, of which they report their Social Security numbers. Not all participants are comfortable doing so. We have worked and will continue to work in the coming year with the grantees to support them with trauma-informed data collection and with clarifying for participants why we're asking for their Social Security number. The fact of the matter is, some programs don't have very high rates of Social Security number reporting. And while we're hoping that will increase in the coming year, it does limit some of the confidence that we have in these outcomes. This is as I said, this is a partway through the program. So this is not the end of the story, but it's something I'll return to before we're done here. Next slide, please. This slide shows highlights for each of the 8 different arms of Future Ready Oregon. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you will see some of these, some of the findings that you heard in the last slide repeated in a number of these. You'll see wage gains, employment, pretty high job placement rates after services, the number of services, the number of participants who are served, and some of the, for all of those programs that do serve participants directly. That would include Prosperity 10,000, the Workforce Ready grants, youth programs, registered apprenticeships, career pathways, and the last 3 programs, Credit for Prior Learning, Workforce Benefits Navigators, and Industry Consortia, were not at a place, either are not focused on serving participants directly, for example, the Industry Consortia, or we're not yet at that point by June 30th in the case of the workforce benefits navigators. So the workforce benefits navigators are all up and all stood up and operating. Some of them have certainly served participants directly. That was the last arm of Future Ready Oregon to get going because it's entirely funded by federal funding and the timeline on it is a little different. I do want to point out a couple other pieces here. The Prosperity 10,000 has some slightly different highlights on this slide, and that's because it's the only one of the 8 programs that has numerical goals for the number of participants that it's designed to serve, what their job placement rate is, and how much per hour they're supposed to be making. They are well on their way to meeting those goals. That's sort of the takeaway there. You'll also see, as Jennifer alluded, Workforce Ready grants have implemented all of their funding and have a new round of grantees. And so we anticipate that the number of participants served by those Workforce Ready grants will rise substantially in the coming year. Much of the first round of funding was infrastructure focused. That is also the case for credit for prior learning and for some of the career pathways funding. But by and large, there are positive findings here for each of the 8 programs. The asterisk focuses on that caveat that I mentioned prior, where the Social Security number reporting is low enough that we have less confidence in those results. Next slide, please. This slide focuses particularly on the manufacturing industry. In the report, we lay out the projections for healthcare and manufacturing and technology industry sectors, and we update those every year as they're updated with data from the Employment Department and national data. And here what you'll see is that, probably no surprise to any of you, the need for manufacturing workers maintains. This was not a fly-by-night focus industry. It is why there is that very good news that we saw near such high employment in manufacturing among the Future Ready Oregon participants. Next slide, please. This is a slide that shows a little more detail for this audience on the topic-based training. So as I said, some of the workforce development services are focused on workforce development in a general way, and some are focused on particular job training for particular career fields or particular industries or programs. And we've broken that out here in these 2 pie charts. And on the one on the left, the participation, the manufacturing is really in that light blue, the mechanic, repair, and precision production. And then on the right-hand side is the number of credentials earned, so educational credentials earned by participants in the period covered. We will continue to track both the employment and the educational outcomes of participants in the coming reports as well. Next slide, please. This slide returns to the way we have framed this multi-year investment in a general way, looking at the goals of the program in the statute and sort of very intertwined goals of having an investment that bolsters economic security for individuals with employment outcomes, but also for businesses and for the state. As well as improving equity, again, for individuals, but also for businesses and for the state. And what we're beginning to see in this 3rd year report is a set of findings that support these 2 questions. The first couple years of the assessment really were focused more on implementation and didn't have quite enough data yet to really start to grapple with these overarching questions. But what we're seeing in this 3rd year is the sort of gradual accumulation of findings that say, yes, Future Ready Oregon is leading to greater economic security. We're seeing these positive employment outcomes. We're seeing them across the different programs. And in terms of equity, we're seeing them across the many priority populations. And that's actually a really important finding. Oftentimes in a program that's this multifaceted, we'll see positive outcomes in some areas and much more clearly than in others. And that is not, generally speaking, what we're finding here. What we're finding is a pretty consistent set of positive outcomes, albeit initial. I know the program's not over, but nonetheless, a pretty consistent set of positive outcomes across priority populations. Now, the one caveat to that I will say, above and beyond Social Security numbers, is that we don't see strong representation of older workers among participants. Individuals who might face employment discrimination on the basis of age is one of the priority populations. And we do see that can include both young and older workers. We do see strong representation of younger workers in among Future Ready Oregon participants, but we don't see the same thing at the older end of the age spectrum. And if we're going to meet those labor shortages, we're going to need as many Oregonians as possible. So we do call that out here. Next slide, please. So the report really wraps up with 4 very overarching findings and recommendations. We've done this every year in the reports to try and help the programs focus on particular areas where we see there might need to be particular attention. The first of these findings is really about community engagement. This is something that we have seen since the start of Future Ready Oregon, and really is something that's different about this investment. It has very strong community engagement across the board, with stronger than many government-funded investments, I would say. And we do believe that that is part of the reason that is connected to why we see such strong representation of priority populations and why we see such relatively consistent findings across those priority populations. So the recommendation here is really for grantees to continue that community engagement because we do see it as one of the keys to those positive findings. The second overall finding is, as I referenced on the last slide, to have some consistent and focused outreach on Oregonians who are age 40 and older, because that is the one group we see underrepresented among participants. And so that recommendation there, clear to focus on those Oregonians. Next slide, please. The third overarching finding is to improve the data collection because of this underreporting of Social Security numbers. We're limited in the employment outcome work that we can do, and we really need to track that across many years to be able to watch, hopefully, wages increase and careers trajectories rise of participants. And we will continue to work with grantees on that, but it's not only Social Security number. It's also needing really the grantees to make sure that they report which area their workforce training is in, if it's focused in a particular career field, so that we can identify accurately how much of the training is focused on manufacturing or healthcare or technology work. And then the last overall finding is really not something that we're calling out as a problem, but really that the investment is halfway through its time period, and we don't want to wait to the end and discover there's a problem. And this is to make sure that Future Ready Oregon services are reaching not only individuals who are seeking to upskill, but also individuals who are not yet engaged in the labor force. So folks who are not working and are not currently looking for work, we need to be able to bring those workers into the services offered by Future Ready Oregon if they're not yet there, in order to expand the labor force. The only way we're going to make the labor force bigger is to reach those and meet those labor force shortages, is to be able to reach those Oregonians who have not been employed for some time and have not been looking for work. So we call special attention to that to make sure that those are part of the group. And with that, I'm going to pause and see if there are questions.
You can feel free to put questions in the chat or come off mute and ask if you're comfortable.
I have a question. With the first finding, it said more community engagement, and I just was wondering if you could clarify what community engagement means in that context.
That's a great question. And it has meant a lot of things in the investment among the grantees. Some of it has been partnering with new partners who are not necessarily workforce training providers, but are plugged into a community that has high representation in a local area. And so partnering with that community-based organization to be able to maximize reach of the services to that community. Sometimes it has been local workforce boards partnering with workforce training providers who have particular community focuses that they haven't partnered with as much as in the past. So it has encompassed a range of different types of community engagement. Sometimes it has been inviting community-based organizations to RFA review, to review applications. The Workforce Ready Grants program has done that to help with the prioritization and selection of applicants for grants. And it isn't so much that we think there needs to be more, I wouldn't turn that down, but rather that we want to make sure that that level of community engagement maintains, because it is different than what is typically done. And so we want to make sure that that grantees continue to do that, continue to outreach to their community partners to keep the engagement of the priority populations. I see a question in the chat. What's the overarching reporting rate of SSNs? I'll look it up and put it in the chat in just a moment. It does vary across the programs, though. I see a hand, Amanda.
Yeah, I just had a question, and if you don't have it off the top of your head, that's fine. It would be good, I think, to report to this group is just the breakdown of maybe the sectors that have, like the specific sectors that have gotten, like what the benefits have been to different sectors within kind of manufacturing, because manufacturing is, I think, a lot more broad than some of the other industry consortiums and sort of focus areas of Future Ready Oregon. So I'd be kind of curious if it seems like there's one kind of specific sector that's maybe been better and more engaged in the program, or others that we're leaving behind that, you know, might just inform future outreach to, or maybe even trying to get more folks from those specific parts of the sector engaged with this group, or just with the program in general. But just curious kind of on a whole.
Can I clarify, you mean within manufacturing sector? Are there sort of subsectors of manufacturing that have been more represented? I don't have an answer to that offhand, but I'll ask and get back to you, and at least through Nick, if no one else. I'd have to look and see I shouldn't say this is really the body of a whole team of work. I'm just a figurehead of that team. But I'll check with the team, and we'll see if we have any more detail about within the manufacturing sector, if there's a dominant representation or if it's dispersed.
And I might add technology. Okay. I might add, are you going to mute? No, your volume. It's echoing. Okay, good. Good thing this is not the technology consortium. I will just add that you're going to see this in the Workforce Ready grant overview, and you have in your packets a table of all of the manufacturing focused awards. And Amanda, it's such a great question. And this group has, thought about manufacturing skills as really transferable across Oregon's diverse manufacturing landscape. And you will see awards, at least in the Workforce Ready grant portfolio, that include the semiconductor sector, food and beverage manufacturing, forest products, just to name a few. So we'll talk about that a little bit more when we look at the Workforce Ready grants broadly.
And I was just going to say that we will follow up with any data requests too.
And I do see Jonathan in the chat says, are we able to get a medium hourly rate for the 10,000, the Prosperity 10,000? Yes, the reason it's noted differently on that slide is because of those numericals where 75% at least of the participants need to have a median hourly wage above $17.50 or something like that. That's why it's phrased that way. The median hourly wage of the Prosperity 10,000, I think, is $21, but I'll confirm that and get back to you, as well as the SSN rate and the manufacturing subsectors. And I apologize for allergies and throat and choking a little bit during the presentation.
Dan has a comment in the chat. I'll just go ahead and read it out for folks. I should think that addressing engagement employment of older candidates would require simultaneously attracting older individuals and exploring/addressing the propensity to provide a friendly hiring environment so that they have the opportunity to be hired. Any ideas or thoughts on that?
That is a really good point, and I would say yes, that is absolutely something that would have to happen for any group of people, and including, in this case, older candidates. Prior to even having a friendly employment environment or willingness of employers to hire older workers, prior to that, we need to see them among the participants. And that's the piece we're not yet seeing. They're underrepresented among the participants. So you're right, Dan, that employers need to be making space. And at the same time, we also need to be able to be bringing them into the Future Ready Oregon services prior to even doing that job seeking. Amanda?
Yeah, I had a follow-up question on that piece too, that 40 plus. For that recommendation, is that trying to get more of that age cohort into the workforce in entry-level positions, or are you thinking, how do we ensure that there are higher skilled positions where those folks that maybe have other skills from, being previously employed, but then they fell out of the employment field for, one reason or the other, just kind of, can you explain a little bit more of like what that audience looks like and how you think they would best be served coming into the employment space, and kind of how these wraparound services would best suit them?
That's a great set of questions too. So I would say sort of D, all of the above. And what I mean by that is, yes, attract older workers who are already in the labor force and work with them on upskilling. And as well as, especially in combination with that last finding and recommendation, to engage older workers who are not yet working and haven't been for some time, and to be able to return to get the training they need to be able to get into a job that may or may not be entry level depending on their history, but is a job that would provide some upward career trajectory. certainly, like the implication in some of what you said, and so I'll just call out that the labor force participation rate is quite high for people who are 40 to 55, and then starts to drop off. So at different ages in that's a big group, 40 and up, right? But at different ages in that group, probably the outreach is going to look different, right? Probably for the older of that age group, the above 55, it's going to be more about getting back into the labor force.
One other kind of follow-up question, if I can, Nick.
Yeah, we're actually running a little ahead of a schedule, so absolutely we can. Yep.
For that age cohort, do we have any idea? And I know, Gail, you're here with the employment department too, but do we have any idea what kind of gender split is within that? Because I'm thinking about, you know, if it's mostly men or mostly women, you know, if it's women, is it moms that, you know, re-entering the job market, following, you know, kids leaving the house? Is it more men in a certain specific kind of part of their life? Just like curious, because that kind of changes, you know, maybe what jobs or how you kind of communicate with those cohorts. Just more information maybe would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, and I'm happy to have Gail chime in if she wants to on labor force participation rates by gender and age. I will say that some of that also varies based on the age, right? So again, 40 and up's a big span. I would say that there is, especially at the older parts of that, there's less gender disparity. And I think that neither of these groups, nowhere in our adult population do we have labor force participation rates approaching 100%. So I think that there's room. I think what I would say, and I hear what you're saying, is how do we prioritize this? Really, like how can we, with limited time and resources, try and reach the most likely older Oregonians? And I think that's a really good question. And we'd be happy to try to offer some, you know, insights into that, looking more at maybe breaking that group down a bit of who's not, of the participants, that work that we haven't yet done in this third-year report. I think another way to think about it is also what are the strengths of from a grantee perspective, or from, you know, the money has been dispersed and expended now, you know, grantees have been funded. So from a grantee perspective, you know, what is that grantee's strengths, and are they including older Oregonians in that set of strengths, right? So unless your youth works, your youth services, right, where you're focusing on 16 to 24-year-olds, how can you take the work that you're doing, the good work that you're already doing with a group or community, and make sure that you're also engaging older Oregonians in that work?
Jonathan, do you want to hop in?
Go, Gail.
Quickly, so one of the things that happens for us is we are in that limited space of working with older, and I don't think older is older, by the way.
I don't think older is a bad word. Let me just say that I'm older, not a bad word.
Just want to make sure. But there's an interesting parallel that happens, at least in the work we've been doing, and it's with that family unit. And when we look at the youth, the 20, 24, their parents are in their 40s. So they begin that trajectory up. So the function of those older Oregonians in relation to the youth, and the family that some of those youth has also began, is interesting. So have we? An interesting exercise is looking at how is that supported? You know, do I have as a 24-year-old with a child, do I have my parents not going back into full work because they're trying to support the childcare needs that I have in my house, right? While my dad is becoming the bread owner of that house, who is probably, you know, maybe 2 years older, than my mom, or my mom's 2 years older than my dad, but it's that correlation and how today these families are working together as a workforce unit. You know, it's not as isolated as it used to. We don't have 24-year-olds out there on their own, and there's these weird units that are happening. And I just bring it up because I think that there is a correlation, and I'm thinking about Centro's Prosperidad. They know how many 40-year-olds have 20-year-olds in their households. And the challenge that both of them are the ones who are going in for the same job. They find themselves often entering new markets at exactly the same time. And parents tend to make the sacrifice to push the kid forward than themselves. So as we look at that system and it's a point to think about as we look at this, and if we could actually get data around those with limited time and resources and data. Amy, I heard you. Don't want to add more to your work.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that. You know, I wish we had visibility into family and household in this work, which we don't. It is, you know, the early part of my career, I really looked at work really from the family and household perspective, and they're not separate entities, right? They're not separate entities for any of us. And I will say the data collection has been challenging for grantees, for participants, to add for all of the markers of priority population. Wait, why do you want to know this? Why do you want me to tell you this? To add, like, how many people live in your house, and, you know, are you on good terms with your parents? And, you know, I mean, but yes, 100% yes, that absolutely is part of the story here, that the data we do have don't tell. And I would say, you know, I want to make sure that that the older members of communities are not being left behind in the work, both for their sake and for the fact that the state has these, and businesses and industries have these labor force shortages, right? So those twin goals of the program. I will say, one thing I do want to say, but Anna, you ask your question first, and I'll say this at the end. I know we're about at time.
Well, it's just a question that kind of goes along with this idea as well. And it's something that I've noticed in job seekers that have come through my office just within the past 3-month period, because I'm really looking at a lot of job seekers between that about 39 to 50 year range. And the challenge that they're having, and we think we have all these bazillions of open positions, like it should be really easy to find a job. The way that demographic is searching for a job is not the way they've ever searched for a job before. So this has created a huge barrier, because they don't just walk into a business like they did 15 years ago. And I worked with somebody who was recently hired for a really great position. He had been working for the same company for the last 13 years and hadn't applied for a job, hadn't updated a resume, hadn't looked for anything on Indeed before, had no idea how to even begin that search process. And so I think that the way we're looking at this tech generation that's 24 to 35, that the way that they're searching for a job on LinkedIn and Indeed is completely different than the way that 39 to 55 group needs to come back to the workforce and look for a job. So I don't know if that's something that is a consideration of a barrier that needs to be examined in some way, but it's just for sure the biggest challenge that I'm seeing with that. That's the group that's coming to my office for help.
That is very helpful to hear, and I know we're at time. I'm gonna wrap this up. I'm so glad I was quiet to hear what you had to say. That right there, that is why these industry consortia can be so valuable, right? For businesses and workforce training providers to hear these different sides of the puzzle, and be able to create those environments that are hospitable, in this case to older workers, or training that engages them. I don't have particular data that speaks to that, but you're telling that story to me is exactly the crux of the Future Ready Oregon work, to try and do those greater connections. I will say to close out that the report, as Jennifer amusingly referenced, is long. It is very long. It includes an enormous amount of tables and appendices. And the reason it is long is not because we were trying to make it long, quite the opposite actually, but because there's 8 programs. One reason. There's 10 priority populations, but the good news of that is that what I gave you is but a glimpse. There are a lot of specifics within the report that hopefully can help you continue to do the good work that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy, for that breakdown. And I just want to note that 2 things. One, Alex Bruno, one of HEC's other data and research gurus, popped into the chat to answer Jonas's question about the median wage for Prosperity 10,000. It looks like after service that is $21.50 an hour. So if you didn't see that in the chat, that's some good information. And then Gail from the employment department has offered to follow up with some data. So what we will do is we've tracked these questions and some of these requests, and we'll follow up with you all with some more information on that. And I think, like Amy said, one person's long report is another person's robust, thorough, extremely detailed, and helpful report. So there is a lot of really compelling information in there too. And if you haven't taken a look at it, I do really invite you to spend some time with that report, because I think many of the questions in here are there in some capacity. So I really want to thank Amy for her time, and then move us on to hearing a little bit more about our round 3 workforce ready grants and the status of those. And for that, I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague Jennifer and Katrina.
Thanks, Nick. All right. Great discussion and lots of information for us to dive into and follow up to today's meeting. As promised, we want to give you a flyover of the Workforce Ready Grant, the manufacturing portfolio in the Workforce Ready Grants. Next slide, Ronan. So just to center ourselves, Future Ready Oregon really does represent a fundamental shift in how we're delivering education and training to meet the needs of individuals and employers. And you see here sort of a graphic representation of traditionally an individual might be on the outside of the system, trying to identify the appropriate entry points or relevant services throughout their education and employment trajectory. And Future Ready Oregon is intended to align education, industry, and community partners in a way that is responsive to the needs of learners and workers. And we really do have this unique opportunity to leverage our assets and improve coordination across the post-secondary education and training and public workforce systems. And Future Ready Oregon made investments in new and innovative approaches to education and training that really center partnerships and collaboration. Programs that approach workforce education and training differently by identifying barriers to equitable participation, program completion, and career advancement. The conversation we had about upskilling and reskilling seems very relevant. And by providing job training participants the comprehensive supports and services that they need to be successful. I'm smiling at Abby's comment in the chat because I had this vision scribbled in on the back of a napkin and have to give full credit to our communication specialist, Laura Idem, who I think is on the call, who takes my chicken scratch and makes it very visually appealing. So thank you for calling that out. Future Ready Oregon is investing in local workforce boards and the public workforce system. It is investing in community colleges and universities, community-based organizations, other educational institutions, and workforce service providers, really ensuring that these partners are all aligned and working collaboratively. And I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Katrina, who is our Workforce Ready Grant Administrator, who has the manufacturing portfolio. And she's going to walk you through a little bit of a high-level flyover of the Manufacturing Workforce Ready Grant Awards. Ronan, I think you can go to the next slide, and hopefully Katrina is
thank you,
able to
Jennifer.
join. There you are.
As she introduced, I am Katrina Machoro,
Oh,
the
we cannot
Manufacturing
hear you.
Portfolio
Oh,
Grant
that's on our
Administrator.
end. My apologies.
And I'm here to explain this map a little bit. But before I do so, for some of the new members, as Jennifer said, a brief flyover. The Workforce Ready grants represent the largest investment in Future Ready Oregon. The HEC established this competitive grant program between March 2022 and December 2024. And the HEC has awarded approximately $90 million in workforce ready grants alone, including approximately $38 million awarded to various projects. Funding was strategically implemented through 3 rounds of competitive funding. And an initial round of funding was focused on capacity building. And you can see that with the green pins marked on the map there. And the second round of funding and the third round of funding are still ongoing projects, and they're a mix of innovative partnerships and approaches to education and training, as well as funding focused on sector-specific priorities informed by this consortium. And you can see those in the brown, blue, and orange pins on the map are ongoing projects as well. And if you would like to see a list of the current projects, you can refer to your meeting materials. So refer to the meeting materials that were posted online for the list of funded projects. I also want to point out that the pins on the map are just where the headquarters of the grantees or the recipients are across Oregon. It doesn't necessarily mean that's also where the participants are. So say, for example, there could be a headquartered in Multnomah County, but this grant recipient is serving participants through multiple counties, so Washington and Multnomah. There are many counties that are serving participants throughout the state of Oregon, regardless of where exactly the pin is on the map. So the projects are advancing innovative approaches to education and training, as I described, and as well as clearly defined partnerships, which are leading pathways that are connected to careers, culturally relevant services, and wraparound supports for participants. And projects also support institutions, organizations, and individuals through, like I said, those green pins were capacity building, but all of the pins in general also go towards curriculum development, equipment purchases, and student supports, work-based learning, hands-on training, and mentorships in advanced career preparedness. All of our grantees span from thanks, Nix. From community-based organizations to universities, to community colleges, to local workforce boards as well. So there is a lot of representation across the state of who is supporting participants and how they're getting the participant supports throughout the state to all of Oregonians. And I just want to emphasize that the projects emphasize an ecosystem approach where partnerships and shared leadership and program development and project implementation are key to ensuring outcomes are responsive to the needs of employers while also centering the needs of students and training participants. And again, I just want to draw your attention to your meeting materials, which we have included a table with the descriptions of all the manufacturing specific workforce ready grant funded projects. Next slide, please. So this slide shows some emerging promising practices and replicable strategies of certain projects that we wanted to uplift. Many of the round 3 projects fall under these themes here: emerging or engaging youth and young adults, earn and learn, and addressing critical barriers. So for example, in engaging youth and young adults, Northwest Oregon Works is bringing together the 5 community colleges in its region to start and or strengthen 5 new manufacturing related trades programs, with one of their goals is to increase CTE, internship, and pre-apprenticeship options. The earn and learn theme is directly defined by and influenced by the consortium as a priority. These projects lean into that. So for example, Oregon State University Vets Up program is connecting students who also identify as veterans in the semiconductor field of study with analog devices for paid internships and workforce learning. And then addressing critical barriers. Many of these projects are supporting former adults in custody. We have heard from Abby Lewis, the executive director of Golden Rule Reentry. And I also wanted to uplift that the Central COIC is also working with Central Oregon and the prisons in that area as well, with recently released adults in custody. And then on the bottom here, projects to watch. Consejo Hispano and Oregon State University, their forestry department, are interesting projects because they slightly deviate from projects that have been funded in the past. So for example, Consejo Hispano is a project that is looking at food manufacturing, which is quite interesting. And again, you can locate summaries of all of these projects in your meeting materials.
Thanks, Katrina. I'll link back to the manufacturing specific table that we included in your meeting materials. What I dropped in the chat was the full round 3, so it has the healthcare and technology as well. But we did include a manufacturing specific table that has the same information. So I'll make sure that gets dropped in the chat during the break. Do we have any questions for Katrina or for Jennifer about these grants? Okay, not hearing anything. Then I think now would be an excellent time to take a break. We've been talking at you a bit this morning, and I know if you're like me, a little stretch break is welcome right about now. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. If you could come back at let's call it 10:37. We will start at 10:37. All right. I would like to bring us back together, if we could, and I'll give folks a moment here to get settled. All right. If you're I mentioned this at the top of the meeting. If you're following along with our agenda, unfortunately, we will not have a legislative update today, as Kyle Thomas, our Director of Legislative and Policy Affairs, is out sick. So we will follow that up in Q2. And so we're just going to skip right ahead to what I hope is a helpful and interesting discussion for everyone around some of the occupational and wage data related to HB 3306 that we've been working with here at the HEC to meet the statutory requirements of that bill. Just as a brief reminder, and Ronan here in a second is going to kind of get into this in a little bit more depth. But this consortium does have some requirements around HB 3306, and we'll talk about what those are. However, what we're talking about today and what we're sharing today is sort of how we're thinking about packaging this publicly available data and wanting to kind of get just mostly your initial reactions to how we're packaging it. Does it feel accessible? Does it feel transparent? There are some pretty tight guardrails in that legislation or expectations about what data we use and how we present it and what it is the consortium has to do in regards to that data. And like I said, we'll get into that more in a moment. But what we'll do here is Ronan has a very nice presentation that we'll walk through. And then at the end of that presentation, if you have questions, clarifying questions or substantive questions, I think we'll likely have some time to discuss those. But if there are no questions, what we'll do is we'll put you into some small breakout rooms, and we have some questions that we'd like you to consider and discuss, and then we'll come back to the large group and share maybe one or two highlights from those conversations. But more or less, the goal here is to find out if you all feel like we're on the right track with what we're doing with HB 3306, and if you feel like there are any different ways of presenting this data, things like that. But with that preamble out of the way, I want to turn things over to Roman Fitzsimons-Bray, our administrative specialist here at the HEC, to talk a bit more about the work he's really been leading with HB 3306.
Thanks, Nick. So hi, everyone. My name is Ronan Fitzsimons-Bray. I'm the administrative specialist on the Future Ready team here at the HEC. I'm also the public meetings administrator for each of the industry consortia. And not to repeat, not to be repetitive, but today we're just going to be presenting on some of this behind the scenes work we've been doing to sort of put together a body of wage and occupation data for you all to look at. I will just keep it going here. Let's see. Okay. So our objective again is really to sort of gather your feedback, recommendations on how we package or present what is publicly available data from the employment department. You're not going to be approving or voting on any of this today, but our goal is that using your feedback from today's presentation, we would be able to bring you a sort of comprehensive list of all of the high-skilled occupations in the manufacturing sector to approve, and for us to then publish on the HEC's website at your second quarterly meeting. And this is really, again, with the aim of meeting what we see as the minimum statutory requirements of this legislation. So to that end, what I'm going to be talking about today is first, I'm going to quickly review and recap what the legislation actually requires each of the consortia to do. And I'll touch briefly on some of the definitional decisions and data sources that we covered at our last quarterly meeting back in October. Next, to contextualize some of the occupation and wage data you're going to see, I'm going to provide a super high-level overview of the manufacturing sector in Oregon. And then we'll get into actually looking at a sort of subset or snapshot of those high-skill occupations in the sector, and an example of sort of a occupation profile as to how we might be able to do a deeper dive on each one of those occupations. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions and discussions before you all go into your breakout groups. All right. So to cast your minds back to October of last year when we first introduced this work, in 2023, the Oregon legislature passed House Bill 3306, and this created a mandate for each industry consortia to establish wage rate standards varied by locality for each skilled occupation in each sector. Additionally, once every 2 years, each consortium shall recalculate those wage rate standards using relevant economic and employment data made available by the employment department. And at our last meeting, we highlighted how these two key terms, locality and skilled occupation, were left undefined in statute. They were also undefined in the original sort of foundational statute of Future Ready Oregon, and how these sort of set the baseline for implementation. And we provided a couple of, applicable uses and definitions for both terms as it relates to this task of publishing wage rates. And ultimately, where we've landed is when we say locality, we're going to mean local workforce development board regions. And when we say skilled occupation, we are going to be referring to the Oregon Employment Department's definition of a high skill occupation. And this is really done to just align this work and this data, to align this work with the data that we're getting from the Employment Department as is specified in the statute itself. And just to quickly touch back on the sort of data sources sector definitions, the Employment Department primarily uses the North American Industry Classification System, also known as NAICS, in their analysis of each industry sector. Oh, and I just want to give a quick shout out to Gail for being on the line, who's going to keep me on my toes and fact check me if I say anything that is out of order. Okay. Moving on to a quick overview of the sector itself. This is a comprehensive list of all of the sub-industries considered by NAICS to be within the manufacturing sector. This is partly for my own edification. I know at our last meeting, I erroneously left some industries off of this list. This also might be a good time to just quickly touch on sort of how businesses are grouped into these industries, and this is going to be a gross overgeneralization, but essentially based on a number of data points, including payroll, production processes, businesses are grouped into these industries. And these 3-digit codes here are basically the highest level view that we can get of each of the subsectors in the manufacturing sector, according to NAICS. And each of these can be broken out into much further detail. So to contextualize some of the data you're about to see, as I know folks at the last meeting had requested some of this, this is a 10,000-foot view of the sector in Oregon today. Again, I'm not going to claim to be an expert in wage and employment data in Oregon. This is all coming from what is publicly available on the Employment Department's website. A quick overview, definition of the sector according to NAICS itself. Comprises establishments engaged in the mechanical, physical, or chemical transformation of materials into new products. However, the definition of what constitutes a new product can be somewhat subjective. The reason I include this is I know there was some folks had expressed a desire to use I believe it was the 6 system, the Standard Industry Classification System. And I know NAICS has both its insights and its limitations. All that is to say, I think there's a bit of nuance that is being captured here as well. Moving on, the average annual sector wage in Oregon as of 2023 was around $83,000. This graph on the left here represents the most recent data publicly available on employment in the sector from September of 2024, around 187,000. This graph on the right here is private business units or establishments in Oregon, also from third quarter of 2024. Okay, so before we get to looking at the actual occupations themselves, to sort of contextualize how we put together this very limited list for you all to view. We essentially examined the list of occupations that are currently used by the employment department in their analysis of the manufacturing sector and cross-referenced that with the employment department's high wage, high demand, and high skill occupations. Each of the occupations you're going to see today is at minimum defined by high skill, so keeping in accordance with the statutory requirements of House Bill 3306, and is also considered high wage or high demand. I will just caveat that not all of the high skilled occupations in the sector are necessarily high wage or high demand as well. We also chose occupations to represent what we see as the breadth of the manufacturing industry, and to include a balance of apprenticeship and non-apprenticeship or work-based learning or internship opportunities in terms of education requirements. And again, I'm going to keep reinforcing this, but the occupation and wage information you're about to see is really just a snapshot of high skill occupations in the sector and is by no means exhaustive. So a quick definitional recap. High skill occupations are defined by the employment department as occupations with a typical education level needed for entry of post-secondary training or higher, or occupations with an apprenticeship as a typical on-the-job training level, or occupations typically needing related work experience or long-term on-the-job training for entry and post-secondary training or above as competitive. And if you recall from our last meeting, one of the reasons why we were more inclined to use this definition as a substitute for skilled occupation is that it not only takes into account apprenticeships, but goes beyond that as well. High demand occupations, in this case, are occupations having more than the median number of total openings statewide or for a particular area. I believe in this case, that number is around, I think it's like 620 openings. High wage occupations are occupations paying more than the all ownership median wage statewide or for a particular area. And I believe the number for a high wage occupation in this case is a median annual wage greater than $51,000. Okay. So moving on to looking at the occupations themselves, here's the first, I think, 8 of the 15, and we've sorted them by current employment. And if you're viewing this on your own screens, you can actually click on the links in the occupation titles here, and that will open up the occupation profile pages on the employment department. We've also just pulled a number of sort of very high level statistics for you all to see. So I'll just quickly run through what these occupations are: electricians, industrial machinery mechanics, plumbers, pipe fitters, and steam fitters, semiconductor processing technicians, heating, air conditioning, and refrigeration mechanics and installers, industrial engineers, electrical engineers, and mechanical engineers. And then now moving on to our next set here. We have mobile heavy equipment mechanics, sheet metal workers, industrial engineering technologists and technicians, engineering technologists and technicians except drafters, computer numerically controlled programmers, and precision instrument and equipment repairers. And this is, I think, a good point just to remind folks that an occupation title does not necessarily correspond or is not the same thing as a job title. And in fact, the way sort of the Bureau of Labor and Statistics does this, and this is also going to be a gross overgeneralization, is that jobs are essentially grouped together based on similarities in work performed, production processes, and then they get categorized into these sort of very broad umbrella occupation titles. But you might be wondering, if you're sort of glued to the statute, as I am, how locality comes into this and sort of what additional information can we bring in, as this is sort of, not very comprehensive in this current format. And so what we've done here is we've put together a occupation profile in this case for industrial machinery mechanics, for you all to kind of react to and digest as an example of how we might be able to get into some deeper detail on each of these occupations. So here I've included a quick occupation description. This is pulled from the standard occupation classification system that the Bureau of Labor and Statistics uses to assign jobs to particular occupations. And I'll just highlight that there are some illustrative examples of what job titles in this occupation might look like. We've also pulled some education requirements, the minimum requirements. In this case, industrial machinery mechanics, I believe, require an apprenticeship. And so this minimum requirement indicates the requirement to get into the apprenticeship rather than to actually work in this occupation, if that makes sense. We've also pulled top industries of employment. This occupation is overwhelmingly concentrated in manufacturing, as you can see, but I'll just note there are a lot of others in the sector that are much more fragmented across industries. And then we have a bit of this hourly wage range variation here. This graph on the left hand represents the wage percentiles from the 10th to the 90th in Oregon overall. So it's non-sector specific. And this chart on the right represents those percentiles specifically within the manufacturing sector in Oregon for this occupation. So capturing locality, here's one way we could go about it. This is also, very high level, sort of 10,000 foot view, where we've essentially broken out employment and median hourly wage across each of the regions that the employment department publishes data for. So, this gets us more of that geographic component. It's a little more visually striking. And again, I'll just remind folks that the way we present this data is sort of very flexible, and that's what we're looking for your feedback on today. So if you see something and you're like, oh, this really works, or this really doesn't, that's what we're interested in hearing. And here's another way we could capture that sort of wage variation by locality. And this gives us a little more of an in-depth look at sort of those hourly wage percentiles across each region, from the 10th at the bottom to the 90th at the top here. I'll call out, because it's interesting to me, that the 90th percentile in East Cascades, which is admittedly a big region, is in this case making almost $9 an hour more than the highest percentile in the Portland metro area. So here's some things that just for you to digest, react to, and then I'm actually going to move on to my last slide here. And before I turn it back to Nick to facilitate the breakout discussion, is there any questions on sort of the data itself or comments?
I wanted to chime. There was a comment. Amanda made it, asking about trucking within manufacturing. And I just wanted to mention quickly that there's two different things that go on. One is, so way back in the day, I used to work for a wood products manufacturing company. And that company had on its payroll some folks who did, who drove. They drove trucks. They either took things, up from Wisconsin to Minnesota, or they did stuff that was locally or whatever. So they were on the payroll of the company. They were driving semis, and they would be considered payroll employees of that manufacturing company. That happens. It's not the most common thing, obviously. There's also then trucking, transportation, like long haul trucking, and also local delivery stuff and things like that. That's found in a different area of the industry coding, and it's its own thing. So there is some trucking that's specifically on payroll and manufacturing. That's not the broader thing. Most of it's found somewhere else. But the thing about that is it's hard to parse out which parts of the trucking would be due to like Amazon, which is really warehousing, versus the transportation and moving of stuff that is manufactured product of an Oregon company. All right, I'm gonna stop talking, but I just wanted to address that quick.
Thank you, Gail. Kyle, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, so as a person who loves all this labor data, I find this really fascinating, very interesting, but I'm still curious how this data will be used. Like, what is the objective or the purpose that the legislature had in mind as they were asking us to put this together? I mean, I can see publishing labor data as a really important exercise for this consortium, but just curious what the specific purpose is for and how we'll use this information.
Ronan, do you want to? I think there's really two answers to this question. I have a perspective on it, but Ronan, will you remind the consortium specifically what the requirements of the legislation is for the consortium? So, like, what do we have to do? Because I think there's the what we have to do, and then there's also the what can we do, and that's partially what we want to discuss in small breakout rooms too. But Ronan, can you remind us what we have to do as a consortium?
Yeah, so the minimum statutory requirements are essentially just say publish wage data for skilled occupations in each sector, and submit that to the Higher Education Coordinating Commission to publish. That's sort of all we get in the statute. I think I tracked this bill during the 2023 session. It was under development, and I can speak sort of broadly about some of the conversations that went on in the legislative committees that this passed through. One of the things that sort of sponsors of the bill referenced was, there's a lot of sort of wage rate standards that are established and enforced under federal apprenticeship law that are not necessarily, that's not always the case for other sort of internship and work-based learning opportunities. And so I think this was maybe intended to sort of fill that gap. Although I would also just say though, like what we're interested in doing really is sort of satisfying this minimum legislative requirement. But this does not mean that this consortium can't use this data or this body of work and take it in a different direction beyond those minimum statutory requirements, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
Ronan, I might jump in as well, just to say, I think the ultimate goal is around wage transparency. There's a separate part of House Bill 3306 that focuses on organizations that are receiving grants for earn and learn training opportunities and ensuring transparency around wages and training pathways. And so our thinking around this is twofold. One, as Ronan said, we can publish wage and occupation data specific to each of the sectors for which we have consortium. And the application of that could be broader, and that's part of what we're hoping you all will add to the discussion. So we can be thinking about how to package the information in a way that's useful. We can certainly just post wage and occupation data by locality, but it seems like there may be some other applications that the consortium, across all three consortium, can identify. So hopefully that helps. I think ultimately it's around wage and occupation transparency for training participants. And you all have some thoughts about other ways we can use the information.
Oh,
go ahead.
And I follow the legislation it was passed. I am having trouble grasping why you all need to put yourself up to the extra work of replicating stuff that's already on quality info instead of just linking people there.
because we believe that it's what the statute requires us to do.
Yeah, but I mean, like, you like, there's your transparency. It's right there.
Yeah.
Like, but I think one of the things that I'm more curious about, and I'm afraid to say it out loud because I don't know what's going to come back at me, but it's like, was not the intent with the reporting piece more like what Amy was talking about earlier, was like, here's what's happening with the folks that are doing our stuff, and like comparatively, this is what people tend to earn in this industry.
For House Bill 3306 specifically, no.
Okay.
The way it's written is to provide wage scales by locality for occupations within the sector that is for the industry consortium. So for you all in this space within manufacturing, looking at occupations, wages by locality. And I think some of the strategies where we're weaving in career and credential pathways in alignment with those gives us the ability to repackage already available data, Gail, to your point, but maybe with some additional overlays that intersect with our work as a consortium.
Okay. Yeah. All right. That added piece with the career pathways piece helps me more. Thanks.
Yeah, I think this discussion really sets up our next agenda item, which I'm going to send us to here in a second. But I think the way we're approaching this also, I don't want to guess necessarily too hard at the spirit of the legislation, but it asks the industry consortia to really engage with this data in a way that, while it is there, I mean, the transparency is there. I think this approach to it allows us to really go back to legislature and say, no, we wrestled with this as a consortium. We have ultimately voted on this, as we will at Q2. And so we're meeting the spirit of the legislation there in that way too. So I think that would be my only addition to this conversation. With that in mind, I think there is a robust discussion to be had here. And so what we want to do to start that conversation is to ask you to step into, we're going to open up breakout rooms in a moment. We've kind of pre-assigned these, and each breakout room has a HEC facilitator, one of our staff who volunteered to kind of help lead the discussion and take notes. We're going to have we're really nicely ahead of schedule here, so we're going to take a full 15 minutes for this discussion, and then what we'll do is we'll come back and I'll ask each group to share maybe one highlight, and we'll just see how the conversation organically grows from there, because we have some time to really sit with this. Again, there's no action item here, but we have two questions we really would like you to focus in on. One, the way that Ronan just presented that data, and your facilitators will have the slides that they'll be able to share with you too, so you can see those in the breakout room. Are there ways that you can think of that would make this more accessible or easier to understand for a really broad audience? I mean, don't just think about those of us who are on the call who may or may not already have really good facility with this information. This is meant to be broadly transparent to families, future employees, employers, potential learners. So when we're talking about accessible and easier to understand, we'd love any feedback you have on that. And then I think to Kyle's point here a little bit, we understand what the statutory requirements of the bill are, but how could we use this data to advance the objectives of the consortium? What do you see here as being useful towards things that you would like to see this consortium take on in this data, whether that's career pathway mapping, credential mapping? I think there's some discussion in the chat about where what cannot be captured, like trucking, for example, as such a key aspect of the manufacturing industry not being in the NAICS code for manufacturing. So really, I think this is just a brainstorming session to think about how you see this data being useful to the broad work of the consortium. So with that said, we're going to take a full 15 minutes for this discussion. I'll ask Emily to go ahead and open the breakout rooms. When you get that prompt, please do get in there. We'll broadcast a 2-minute warning and we'll close the breakout rooms with 60 seconds. So hopefully you'll have a good chance to get your discussions to a good point. But with that in mind, we'll come back here around 11:23, 11:24, so give or take. So yeah, Emily, if you wouldn't mind opening the discussion rooms. If you're not a member of the consortium, you won't be prompted to join the discussion room. Right now, these breakout rooms are just for consortium members. Yeah, and we'll see you back here in about 15 minutes for a full conversation. All right, welcome back. I apologize if the conversation's cut off in in the middle of some really profound thought. When we were planning this agenda item, we weren't sure that we were going to have a ton of time, so we kind of set it up with that in mind. But it turns out we do have a good bit of time left to continue the conversation, perhaps here in the full group. So I would like to make available the next 10 to 15 minutes for sharing out any discussion items, questions, things that you'd like the full group to consider. And we'll just take it as it comes. So does anybody have anything, reactions, things they'd like to share with the full group in regards to what they were discussing in breakout rooms?
I have a couple, like one overall comment. I think our team in general talked about the way to make the information as graphical or infographics or ways that it could be easily dissolved by multiple different types of audiences, right? Because this could be used from a student to a job seeker to an employer to, so just making it super easy to understand, and percentiles and things like that tend to be a little bit harder for people to really even understand what does that mean. And so that was one, but we were really having a good conversation around how this really helps our consortia and around identifying gaps and having good conversations. Because as we start looking at it and we're looking at it more granular by sector or other things, like how do we identify where there's areas that we're not talking about? One of the things that we were just having a conversation around was just around supply chain logistics in general. Like, trucking came up before, but like, where does supply chain management or supply chain logistics or things that are so important to this sector, right? If you're a finished goods manufacturer and there's no infrastructure to get parts to you or get your product out, it shuts down the whole industry, right? We experienced that in the pandemic. And so we were talking about like, well, where would you code a class to that in high school? Or where would you think about that kind of supply chain management, job codes and other things? And so it was just one area where we said it's one example, but there could be lots of other gaps where if we're really looking at these charts together or things for us to say, but wait, what about? And it might spur some really good conversation amongst the consortia.
I appreciate that, Mariah. I'm curious if gaps came up for anyone else in those small discussions. I know it's when we were putting this together, I was thinking a lot about that, but any other thoughts on how this data might be used or made more accessible?
So our group also brought that up, and John pointed out that he shares this information with families, with parents, with kids. And so like, it's really important, as Mariah just said, that it's very accessible and presented graphically so that families can use it. Like he suggested 5th grade level, but at a level that's super consumable so that people can make decisions based on it. And some of the information may not be that accessible. We did talk about gaps. Specifically, Logan brought up the fact of their experiencing gaps in, well, welding wasn't represented on the chart. So he would like to see welding added. In addition, like there's serious gaps in a specific type of welding, aluminum. And so, that's something he would like to capture, but we had a really great conversation. I see Dan has his hand up, so I'll stop.
Go ahead, Dan.
So very quick, we had a wonderful time in our group, Jonathan, Claudia, and thank you very much, Emily, for keeping us moving along. One of the conversations that we had around making things accessible and available is making sure that the numbers are benchmarked against something. And we know that the median is used explicitly in this work, but the median, if I don't understand the median, if I don't understand what it costs to live in Oregon and what I need in order to be successful, from an economic standpoint, the median's basically meaningless. To have some sort of benchmark, maybe off of the MIT living wage calculator or another similar index that gives an individual an idea of what it can actually do. Because the question is not, do I want to do the work? It's not solely, do I want to do the work? Am I able to do the work? Is, will that work actually help me be successful? And Jonathan, being an excellent agent provocateur, said, well, what about the grain size? And many of these indices do go down to a fairly refined level, to a fairly small level. And we have wonderful data out of employment that tells us on a region-to-region basis what the median is. We can also, with some of the living wage calculators, figure out what it really costs. And after we start to get a feel for these moves and what this looks like, then it's easier to help people understand you can do this. It's interesting. It's compelling. It will also help you pay your bills and be successful. And that's pretty critical if we want to keep people once we get them to buy into what we have to offer.
That's great, Dan. Thank you. I see, Kyle, your hand, and then after that, I think Logan shared something in the chat. I just kind of want to read out, but Kyle, go ahead.
Great, thank you. I think our group also very much saw this as an opportunity to sort of build awareness around the broad career pathways and kind of demystify what this looks like. So love the ideas around making it graphical. We talked about, could there be photos? But also love the idea of even taking it maybe one step further. So as we talk about the degrees and credentials that are required, could we kick out to those in some way? Oh, well, here are the ways that you can enroll or find out information about those. And then also I'll point out two sort of technical issues that Kathy Bishop shared. So Kathy, you can correct me after I'm done or add more. But she suggested that through some of the slides, I use the annual wage data and then we switch to hourly. And she discussed just some of the reasons why that becomes complicated, because we do 12-hour shifts. There's overtime and other things that I'm not an expert here, but she can also talk more about that. It becomes a little misleading when you look at it at the hourly rate. So that was one sort of technical piece of feedback. And the other, when we were looking at the regional data, that seems, I know that's in the legislation, but it seems a little less useful to us on the surface because people are generally in a region looking for employment in that region, probably maybe not as interested in what the wage might be across the state. But furthermore, that regional data should reflect sort of the nuanced sector focus, because different sectors pay different amounts, and you might have, you know, a food and beverage focus in one county, semiconductor in another. So we need some of that context as well. So Kathy, feel free to jump in if I didn't quite.
I think you hit it really well. Just to follow up on the hourly rate. So, you know, a lot of manufacturing does 12-hour shifts, which means people are getting 2 hours of overtime for every day of their regular schedule. So when you look at it and say, okay, this person's making $20 an hour, if you actually equated that because of the 2 hours of overtime, it's more like $21.67 an hour. So I don't know, you know, if those hourly rates are reflecting that, you know, so somebody, because they work 36, 48, you know, 36 one week, 48 the other. If you actually equated their total salary, it wouldn't be a formula of 2,080 hours. It's going to be like 2366 with all the hourly, you know, the overtime they work. So you end up, you know, it's going to state the salary wrong. So, you know, just something that could put manufacturing as in a disadvantage to some other jobs if somebody's not aware of what that really means.
That's great. That's really helpful perspective. Gail, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. Sorry. I'm just curious, is there any way to capture this? Is this nuance that we're talking about, especially with overtime, captured in any of the data, or is it possible to capture it in the data that's available?
So I think about all of them, not just manufacturing. And it's like, if you look at the average weekly hours of all workers, actually, it's like closer to 33, 34. So manufacturing is a little different animal than some of the other sectors of the economy. One of there's so much there. And one of the things that we talked about in my group on the side was how not only, so there are 1 million-ish job titles out there, right? There are 800 standard occupational classifications. So there's going to be dozens of different job titles that get collapsed into one occupation code. Similarly, when you're in manufacturing, you're going to have processing technician, machine operator. So, and that's going to be anywhere from food manufacturing to semiconductor manufacturing. And those two industries don't pay the same thing, but those two occupations are captured in the same code, even when you make it specific to, you know. So that that level of nuance with the amount of data that we have to work with, which thank you to every single employer who ever responds to our surveys, because that's how we have any information at all. And like, I even know what that Eastern Oregon anomaly was that we were talking about like an hour ago. But anyway, so that level of nuance, like, just doesn't, there's not enough money funding anything that allows me to say, you know, like, here's the wage distribution for this one SOC code in this 5-digit detailed industry versus this one, both within manufacturing. Like, that's tough. But one of the things that we do get, and we're one of the only like 3 states in the country that even does this, but it's not robust enough in like any one specific quarter, but it is kind of over time, is that we can look at the starting wages that are offered for different jobs, and then also for different occupations, and then what the experience required is and things like that too, which could get you something that's more specific to a type of job within a specific industry. And we are hiring somebody that we want 5 years of experience for versus somebody like we just no experience required. So there is some, but again, it's not going to be for like this one neighborhood block or even just this one city. It's like, it's broad.
That's super helpful context, Gail. I think too, I mean, so I think one of the things that this conversation line is bringing up for us is thinking about what are the sort of explaining what the limitations of the data are, or where there's going to be variables or variations, like that this is meant to be representative, but not necessarily prophetic in the way that we are able to present this. And I think, you know, I see there's some conversation going on in the chat too, and I want to just emphasize the desire here to really make sure that we can provide some region by region nuance as well, just in terms of where the emphasis is in the manufacturing sector there, who are the, you know, what are the subsectors that are major employers. And that I think that that's something that we agree is where we want to push this as we meet the requirements of the bill. Mariah?
Yeah, it just kind of as everybody's been talking about the overtime or the wages, like actual earnings. Our group also had a conversation around how do you think about total compensation and total rewards? And that's going to probably be really difficult to put on these charts just because of it's going to vary by employer. But maybe even having it for the kind of the intent that someone else had said, helping people make good decisions of some of the things to consider, like what is your total out-of-pocket healthcare cost going to be? What is the 401k contributions at this company? Just so when people are looking at it, you know, I told a story, and I mean, I felt horrible. Like I had someone quit a company once and then call me back in tears because they got their first paycheck at their new company and didn't realize that their out of pocket for their healthcare ate up the dollars that they saw as like they saw this, I'm going to get this raise, and then they took home less. And so helping people make educated decisions, and you know, so many people, especially young folks, are chasing what do they make dollar per hour. I have teenagers, so I mean, like it's constantly in my house, like I got a 20, you know, they know is their dollar per hour, right? They don't look at anything else. So I think that mindset of like, maybe we can just have something on there of things to consider for total compensation, or, you know, do they have tuition reimbursement? What are these other things of like, you know, helping people make good decisions about their career choices to elevate kind of the industry overall. But that was a topic of conversation, and it's a tough one, but it is something I see people struggle with.
I think it's really important. I think, you know, to just be transparent about what I hope the consortium could do with this data as a basis, but really folding in a lot of what we're talking about is the creation of opportunity maps that would likely be more specific to region, that would synthesize a lot of this data, but also add in, you know, I mean, whether it's a profile of someone in that occupation, whether it's questions to ask an employer, like we're talking about here, you know, what is the total compensation package? Not just what my hourly is, what are my health insurance? I mean, thinking about how we could support both employers and learners here. We talk in higher education a lot about the hidden curriculum and how so many of us in higher education just take things on assumption. We don't think about what somebody, especially like a first generation college student, may or may not know when they show up at your door. And so to be a student ready institution in higher education means to think very carefully about the questions that you take as assumptions, but a student might not even know to ask. I think creating a resource that gets at that hidden curriculum for workforce development and workforce more broadly would be something that this consortium would be well positioned to take on, because we are a perspective that can think expansively, but have that grounding data to really back up what we can do more perhaps anecdotally. So I really appreciate how everyone's thinking of it, and it's actually just convincing me more that opportunity mapping is the way to go. But maybe that's just my own personal bias. Other thoughts, other things that folks want to share from the conversation. It sounds like this generated some really interesting thinking. I see Paul's hand. Paul, go ahead.
Well, not to step on Shauna's tail as our spokesperson, but I also think it's important to say the starting place here of what's been shared so far is wonderful. It's comprehensive, it's accessible, it's easy to understand. So we're starting with a really great set of data.
I'm glad to hear that. That was the reaction there, Paul.
John Whiteley has his hand up as well.
I think right now we're just limiting the discussion to consortium members. I think if you're a member of the public that's attending, we will be discussing this again at the Q2 meeting. Please do consider registering for public comment. We would love to hear from you, but we want to make sure that we're sort of following our public meeting laws and expectations here. I appreciate what you're saying in the chat there too, Claudia, about, empowering individuals to make informed decision making. And I think that's helpful that's helpful obviously for employees, but I would encourage employers to think about how that helps as well. I think one of the things we know about the manufacturing sector, perhaps, healthcare may be the only one that sort of competes for it, is like that turnover and that burnout and in that first week, sometimes that first month, how many employees we lose because the expectations aren't aligned with sort of what the work is. And not all of that will we be able to address through transparency and data sharing. But there may be things as we think about this broadly that employers want to make sure that it would be really helpful for employees to know more about this or know more about our industry, for example. And I think that career mapping and what the pathways are within the industries is really important for the overall health of the sector. So,
I just wanted to add, just kind of from the industry side, kind of just to piggyback off of that, is one of the things we talked about was, when it comes to making this more accessible or understandable to the general public, median wages are very different than entry level wages, right? And so that's sometimes it can be misleading when you see a median wage is $89,000, but you're not going to make that for quite a long time. And so just something that I think if we as a consortia are considering how can we repackage this, is making sure we include that entry level data as well, because that's, I think, what is more reasonable or realistic to somebody entering a new profession as opposed to what that median wage is.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think, are there any last comments? Because I think that this leads nicely into what I want to talk about briefly with you all about working groups, because I see a lot of energy and engagement with this. And I think working groups is where we can build on this conversation and make some movement. So before I move on to the next item, any other thoughts, comments for the good of the order? Okay. Great. Ronan, can you bring the slides back up for us and move us to the working group slide? So what I want to propose, and I've discussed this with Mariah and Jonath, and they agree that this, I think, is a good structure, is a standing working group structure for advancing the work between the quarterly meetings. I think, as you all know, and as I've learned since joining the HEC in this position, is that there's a lot of work to do, and quarterly meetings, there's a limitation on how much we can get done. So what we're proposing for now are the creation of 2 standing working groups to advance the work between our quarterly meetings, and then we'll come back to the quarterly meeting and sort of report on what we've accomplished, get feedback from the consortium, and then sort of create that positive feedback loop throughout the year. And what we'd like to focus on, at least for the start, and we'll see how these goes, I think this can be an adaptable structure, are 2 specific working groups. One focused on accelerating access, and I think we're really thinking about this career, credential, opportunity mapping. I think this is the place where we could build on some of this wage and occupation data that we've been discussing, and think really clearly about what would be needed to turn this into a much more expansive and supportive resource for both employers and employees in the state and in the sector. The second working group would be about reducing barriers, identifying strategies, identifying particular barriers where we feel like there are potential strategies for reducing or removing those barriers. And both of those, I think, hopefully feel expansive enough that, like, some of the conversation we've had today about trucking, right? Like, whether it's sort of in the remit of HB 3306 to include that occupational information, we know that it can create a barrier for workforce and economic development in the sector. And so these work groups would be places where we could take up some of these things that don't fit always quite as neatly as we'd like to in other areas of the consortium work. So, and then from there, and we have no specific plans at this moment, as the working groups get into sort of where they feel like the priorities are and where we hear from the consortium, we could also then stand up agile working groups. So rather than these 2 standing working groups, these agile working groups could involve members that are not of the consortium. Right now, we want to keep the standing working groups to members of the consortium, but the agile working groups could focus in on an item. For example, like, we really want to focus on expanding earn and learn opportunities, or if we feel like there's a specific subsector, within manufacturing that could use some real focus or attention from folks in and outside of the consortium, then I think we have the capacity and the ability to stand up these agile working groups. So, Ronan, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide, what I'm asking for today is for you to consider signing up for a working group. What I'm looking for each of these working groups is about 6 to 8 members from the consortium. So, if you don't have the time and the capacity in your calendar, don't feel obligated to do this. And frankly, as the work evolves over the course of the year, maybe things, change in terms of your rhythm and you get really excited about what we're doing and you want to join in. So this is not a one-time only offer. But we would like to meet at least with both of these 2 standing working groups once before our next Q2 meeting, which is April 2nd, so we're going to be coming up quick on that April 2nd meeting. And generally speaking, I think we'll like to meet twice between our quarterly meetings. I think that feels like for an hour virtually where we can advance the work enough to have something good to share with the group. And this first meeting, though, I think we likely only have time to meet once before our Q2 meeting, but do some table setting, right? Define some terms, really think about some outcomes. A little bit about me: I come from an assessment background before I stepped into this role, so I'm keyed into defining measurable outcomes, and I think these working groups are a great place for us to start that work and then really check in with the consortium about whether we're aligned there. And then those agile working groups, we're not really standing up now, but when we identify that need, we would do that. So what I'm asking for right now is for you to either follow this QR code or, and I'm gonna drop this link in the chat really quickly. I just have a really simple Microsoft form at the end of that link that I would ask you to go to, and if you're interested, tell me which of these groups. If you're somebody who's like, hey, I just really want to be engaged in this work, they both sound good, I kind of want to see what they are, there's an option there to say, just put me where you want me based on where the numbers are. But it would be great if we could get around, like I said, around 6 to 8 folks from the consortium in each of these 2 working groups. And then I'll call us together here before our Q2 meeting to get an introductory table setting meeting on the books. Any questions about our working group proposal at this point? Great. Hopefully it is very, simple, straightforward. But if you do have questions and you're like, hey, I might be interested, but I have some questions, please follow up with me after the meeting and I'll be happy to chat with you about what we're envisioning in a little bit more depth, especially if that'll get you off the fence. Ronan, will you advance to the next slide, please? I want to just talk through a couple next steps for the consortium. Like I said, our next meeting is going to be on April 2nd. That one will be back in person. We'll find somewhere in the Portland, Salem metro area to meet. So stay tuned for more information on that. Next item, please. Like I said, we will continue, we'll build out this full list, again, as required by the legislation, and we likely will ask you to approve it at the next meeting, but that doesn't mean that our work with this data is done. I think this is really just a beginning point, but we would like to be able to go to the legislature and say, all right, we've met the minimum legislative requirements, and you can move on to the next one, Ronan. We didn't get a legislative update this time, so we really will have a clearer picture of the legislative session to share with you at Q2. Next item. And I'm hoping to be able to provide you with some updates on the situation as it relates across the sector to apprenticeship and earn and learn in manufacturing. I think this was one of the priorities you all set for the workforce round 3 grants. So I think there's a clear priority and interest in this. Manufacturing is an excellent sector to focus on apprenticeship and earn and learn opportunities. But I think that ecosystem, particularly the apprenticeship capital A ecosystem, is complex and has its own challenges, opportunities, and barriers. And I'm really trying to dive into that with folks across state enterprise, because not one agency really owns apprenticeship. Everybody seems to have a little bit of a piece of it. So I'm hoping to share some information with you all at the next meeting about that. And then our last item here will be to welcome some new executive leadership team members. Like I said, we have some vacancies on the executive leadership team. And so if you could advance to the next slide, I just kind of want to talk about what that process will look like between now and the Q2 meeting. Before I get into our process, though, I want to give Jonath and Mariah a chance. When we were having this discussion in our ELT meeting, they both had really helpful perspectives about what it takes to be successful as an ELT member. So Mariah, Jonath, do you mind just giving a kind of a brief overview of what it means to be an ELT member for this consortium and who might nominate themselves or be nominated for an ELT position?
Sure, I can jump in. I know Jonath and I have had lots of conversation. I think some of the positive thing about having some of these transitions, as well as we're kind of going through this change, is that it gives us an opportunity to bring in some fresh perspective. So over time, it's always great to have new people joining the group or joining in kind of the leading of the discussions and the topics. So I think that's really, I just want to say that I think it's a positive thing that we've got some change. We've had some great discussions over the last couple of years, and it's going to be great to have some new folks on the board. One of the things I would say in general is just being able to facilitate conversation and stay open-minded and understand that everybody at this group is coming from different perspectives, different learned experiences, different things. So I think that that piece of just being able to kind of like not drive an agenda, but really we're here to help kind of help facilitate or re-guide a discussion, or to really help kind of bring the industry ideas in, but know that we also have our own perspectives and that we can kind of make sure you're not getting shut down. So I think that's the biggest piece, is to just make sure that you really can, if you're thinking about it or you know somebody that is, that they can kind of really remain kind of that, open mindset, think about new ways. Or I kind of think about the people that always ask the question of, what if I might be wrong? Like, what else could we consider, or things like, kind of is that a good mindset for this spot. And I'll be quiet for a minute because my strength is not brevity, so I'll just stop and let Jonathan also join in.
Right, I appreciate that. Mine's is neither. So I think for me, I think the amazing part about being in this, it's the different perspectives that came to the table. It was not just one area of the globe being represented. Having manufacturers at the table with community-based organizations, with education. These components were very significant in driving sort of the work that we have worked for the last 3 years. These may not be the same drivers as we enter a different, deeper level of work. And I think that opportunity exists at this junction in terms of the work that comes after all of the last 3 years of work. The skill sets may look a little bit different on how to move those. I think it's important to, as Mariah just identified, is having that neutrality of being in and out of conversations, and also being mindful that the breadth of people at the table is so big that we want to make sure that that's all filtering up and is also filtering out as part of the work. It's been an amazing experience for me as I look at this from not only my lens, the lens of everyone else that we're trying to lift and move through the system, but also those people at the table that are also bringing us in these very significant perspectives that do impact the work that's being done. I don't know if that sounded like an invitation. It sounded like a lot of work, but it's good work. It's fulfilling work, and I think it's essential work for Oregon at this junction.
Thank you, Jonath and Mariah. And I just want to say that you've been excellent to work with as I, orient myself to this work. And so I think hopefully that gives you a sense of what we're talking about when we're talking about the ELT. There's the general expectations are here on the slide. We meet once a month, review recommendations, review agendas and membership recommendations. And we just generally talk about where do we think we should take the conversation? What do we need to focus on? What do we need to prioritize? I think, there'll be some real clear engagement with the working groups and their priorities and objectives as well for the ELT. Just so you know, we are looking with the ELT to sort of reflect the diversity of our participant groups, right? So having someone from an education and training provider, a community-based organization, an employer, industry associations. We want to make sure that the group is being led by a smaller group that really reflects who's at the table here. So what I would ask, the action item here is by the end of the month, the last day of the month, if you're interested in being on the ELT, if you would please either nominate yourself, let me know you're interested, and just send me a quick email. You don't have to put I'm not looking at your resume or anything like that. Just, hey, I'm interested. And what I'll do is I'll set up a follow-up conversation. We can talk a little bit more about it and decide if it potentially is a good fit or not. If you know somebody else on this group that you think would be great and they won't nominate themselves, feel free to nominate them. I'll follow up. I won't even tell them that you nominated them, so you can maintain a friendship there, and just say, hey, somebody thinks you're great. Are you interested in this? And of course you can turn me down if so. But yeah, if I will follow, if you could get back to me by February 28th as to your interest in joining the ELT one way or the other, or with your nominations of someone you want to get on the group, that would be excellent. And yeah, I really do. I see in the chat there. I want to echo the thanks going to Mariah and Jonath. I think this this is kind of an interesting point to be doing this consortium work right now, and having those two leading this work has made my job much easier, and it feels like we're in good hands with those two steering the helm. So thank you so much to you two. And I think that would take us to the last slide, Ronan. Yeah, adjourn. So listen, we are, like I said, we'll be back on April 2nd in person, and holding space together physically. We'll follow up as soon as we have a location, as we normally do, but I really hope to, in the meantime, have a number of conversations with you all. Thanks to those of you who have reached out while we've been meeting. And unless there are any last thoughts or comments, I'm going to adjourn this meeting.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Okay,
Have
bye.
a
Thanks all.
wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.